Soil prep is the next thing we're talking about. So if we've looked through our yard, we've kind of figured out where we have the different types of light, the different, full sun, part sun, shade, etc. And we've kind of decided where we want to go with each sort of plant. The next thing we need to do is we want to get our soil prepared. The three really big things you want to get started with are you want to make sure you have loose soil, weed-free soil, and level soil. Loose soil, what we're looking for is what's called pore space. So with soil, it gets compacted over time, especially if you're walking over it. What you want to make sure is happening is you want to have, with the soil particles, they're usually what we call like subangular blocking. So they're not exactly squares, but they're not exactly circles. They're somewhere in between. But because of that, when you put two of them right next to each other, you have space in between all the different molecules. That gets filled up with air. It gets filled up with water. It gets filled up with microbes. That's where the life is coming in and out of the plants. You might not think about it, but at every single stage of a plant, the plant needs to be able to breathe. So if you've got a seedling that's only this tall and it's raining all the time and you don't have any sort of pore space for that water to kind of wash through and sink into your soil, you're going to actually drown out that little guy. But yeah, so you want to take some time to prep the area first, removing all the weeds that you can already see. Go pull out any of the rocks, any of the really big sticks. Some of the smaller stuff you can leave in there to break down. And then break down any of the really large clumps of compacted soil. You want to loosen your soil with a garden fork, or if you've got a rototiller, you can go and do that. And then start adding any of your soil amendments if you have them. If you want to throw in a compost, if you're throwing in a biochar, I'll actually get to that in a minute. But then rake it to a mostly level surface to get started. There are different crops that we'll get into that, especially in next month's workshop, where you want to prepare the bed in a different way. But the big thing is you want to start off with something that's decently level, so you're not having all the water run off to one side of your garden. So all the water's soaking in, theoretically, level evenly throughout your project area. If you're looking for some soil or soil amendments, Deep Roots has a very large selection of compost, fertilizers, and soil amendments for sale at the Deep Roots website. You guys brought up something really great before when you were talking about weeds and getting started at the very beginning. If you're trying to get it weed-free and you go out and you pull out any of the weeds that are already there, actually, let me backtrack and tell you a different story first. If you're starting with bare grass, if you just have a turf grass yard, there's a couple of ways you can make your life a little bit easier. You can either go in first and try to pull it all out, where you go in with a flat shovel or a spade and you try to just take off that top level of turf grass. By doing so, turf grass has very, very shallow roots. I mean, the very longest roots in turf grass only go down 3 inches. So you can just scoop that right off the top, aerate your soil, and get to work. Another thing you can do if you have a more long-term plan is you can actually just snuff that out by covering it and killing off any of the sunlight. So the way you can do that, if you knew you had a year that you wanted to start a new bed on the other side of your property, or if you have a bed that's completely overrun with weeds and you just want to restart, you can put down a sheet of plywood, black garbage bags, cardboard, whatever it might be, and then cover it with something heavy. Throw some tires on it, empty old bricks, a bunch of rocks, and basically just hold that, whatever that thing is that's holding the light out for a full growing season if you can. And what that'll do is anything that's under there, including turf grass if you had it, it'll completely snuff it out and kill that plant, a lot of those seeds, and help you get restarted. Another thing that you can do is right when you get started on your planting is really, really easy, save up newspapers. I can tell you, I do that every year. You just save up a big stack of newspapers, and then what you do is you lay them all out over your garden bed before you get started. If you want to throw a little bit of soil down to hold the newspapers down, or if it's a really windy day, I'll make sure I'm going out there with either my garden hose or a watering can, and as soon as I get it laid down, wet it down so it stays there. And then when you come back in to add your seeds or your seedlings, you can just come in and cut out or scoop out with your trowel a hole in the newspaper to get to work. And what that's doing is it's blocking a lot of that sunlight from getting down to all of those weed seeds that you don't want. And it's going to help keep some of those weeds away. And then at the same time, you can make sure you're throwing down mulch. And you can try, there's lots of different types of mulch you're going to use for different situations, wood mulch versus straw mulch, but we'll get into that as the season. Once we get into the season where we're actually using mulch and you guys need to be out mulching, we'll cover that in that workshop. So what to plant? Lots of choices. So the first thing you want to do is make a plan. So you guys already kind of, when I asked around the room earlier, you kind of know what you want to try this year, what vegetables you're looking at giving a crack at. So you want to make sure you're looking at what conditions you have, so looking at the light and looking at your soil, understanding if you really have the space and the time to make your dream into this reality. You want to make sure that you're not overbuying or underbuying, which is why we want to plan ahead of time so we know exactly how much space we really have that's usable, and that we don't go and buy 20 tomato plants when we only really have enough sun for 2. We don't want to over or underplant. If we overplant, we're going to crowd out all the different plants in our flower beds. And then if we underplant, we're going to have a situation where we weren't using maximum efficiency, which is fine. But if you're really trying to pump out as much nutritious food as you can in your yard over the growing season, you want to make sure you're maximizing your time. The other thing we're going to want to think about too for maximizing our time and our efficiency is actually rotating out our plants. So a really good example of that is if you're going to grow your lettuce at the very beginning of the springtime, you're going to be able to have lettuce that's pretty decent sized by the time that we get into early summer. And do you want to keep on growing more lettuce? Then it's probably time to grow and put in another row of seeds and try to grow more lettuce. Or do you want to just completely harvest that and start something new? To your snow peas or snap peas situation, wherever your snow peas might be in the early spring, there's not going to be anything there in the heat of summer. So while your snow peas are producing and pumping out your snap peas in the early spring spring into early summer, go ahead and plant some green beans in the same spot. And by the time that the green beans are starting to die off, you'll do a new seeding of your snow peas, and you can keep on moving that with that succession plan. And we'll get into more of that garden planning later. I just wanted to bring up that this is why having a plan is very useful, so you can maximize whatever space you have. So the first thing we're going to talk about is growing from seed. Growing from seed generally is low cost and high input, meaning that seeds, you can get hundreds of them in a bag for a few dollars. And then I was saying high input because usually it means that you have to make sure that you're going out there, you're working your soil, getting your seeds in. If you are starting them inside, you need to retransplant them. But then I also said or not, because when it comes to, yes, they're low cost, so you don't have to put in as much input if you don't want to. If you don't see the return on your value on that, your ROI, if you want to go out and plant, 100 lettuce seeds and just let as many of them come up, and you don't worry about going in and thinning them back out again, it costs you $1. So now you can do that, and you want to rip them out and start again. There goes the other $1 from the $2 you spent on your seeds. So because of that, it's very, very low cost. Types of seeds, I wanted to get into these details to educate all of you. So I listed the 4 major types here. So we've got organic, heirloom, hybrid, and GMOs. And I want to get into all the details of what they all do that's different and where the value is. So with organic seeds, an organic seed, when you're buying one from the store, that means that the parent plant that seed came from was an organic plant. There's nothing about that seed in particular. It's not like they treated it special. It's because the parent plant was raised and grown organically. If you are organic gardening, it means that you're not using synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. It means that your real emphasis is working with the microbes in your soil and the different companion plants that you might be putting in to grow your plant organically, which is, again, not using any sort of those synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. An heirloom plant are usually plants that have been around for more than 50 years. A lot of them are in like the World War II era or before. And those are seeds that have been grown and kept over generations, usually because they have some special trait or they have some special resilience or resistance that whoever decided to keep it found useful. What's really nice about heirloom plants is that usually they tend to remain very, very stable with those characteristics from year to year. So if you hear about people saving seeds They're either saving their organic seeds because they grew it organically and now they can replant some new organic seed again, or they're probably heirloom seeds because it's basically you keep on growing the same heirloom in your yard year after year after year. And just like how that heirloom for so many generations has started to gain traits that make it more and more suited to whatever pest or disease or location, that as the years go on, it gets better and better suited to your yard. A really quick way to summarize that is some of them are really well known for their ability to germinate in certain conditions. And if you had 12 seeds and you planted them all in the soil in your backyard and 5 of them survived, those 5 were ones that were clearly better selected for propagating in your yard. So by saving one of those 5, now its offspring have a better chance of also propagating in your yard. So that's heirlooms. Hybrids are usually a cross of 2 different plants that are from the same species, and you're again trying to go for similar traits, but they're cross-pollinated. So what that means, if I have my favorite tomato that is resistant to some disease, and you have a favorite tomato that tastes really, really delicious, we'd cross-pollinate those 2 and hope that we would end up with a tomato that has that disease resistance and is really, really tasty. The problem is, if you save those seeds from your from your hybrid plants, you're not guaranteed for the same plant to come back up again. So what can happen, like I told that story to some of you who were here earlier, they can split off. So the story I told earlier was I was growing the little ornamental pumpkins, and they were little ornamental white pumpkins, which are made from white gourds, and then being cross-pollinated with little orange pumpkins. And when I saved the seeds from that, I ended up with a bunch of little white gourds and a bunch of little orange pumpkins. So with hybrid and GMO seeds, you have to buy new ones every year. And now we're getting into GMOs, which I know everybody really has a lot of opinions on. So I'm going to come in and really bring it home about what GMOs are. So GMO stands for genetically modified organism. And they're usually modified to increase their tolerance or resistance to either heat, stress, drought tolerance, some bug, some disease, or to actually reduce their aesthetic variation, which basically trying to say that they want them all to look the same way every single time. There are 3 main different types of GMOs. The first one are ones where they will take, if you have, before we were talking about those 2 tomatoes, we liked one for its taste and the other one's for its disease resistance. Instead of us just pollinating them and hoping it works, you go in a lab and you splice out the gene that makes them taste good, and you splice it right into the gene or the DNA of the other tomato, so that the tomato that you get back is guaranteed to have both that taste and the disease resistance. The other thing we'll do is we'll actually take genetic material from a relative plant and splice it into a different plant of a different species. So what that good example of that is there's a lot of these like BT corn is a corn where they've taken this. It is a plant, but it's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a little bacteria, and they took a gene from that bacteria and popped it into the corn. So now the corn also produces that same bacteria, which is, you've probably heard of BT, because BT is a spray-on organic pesticide. Because it's just a little bacteria that when the bugs eat it, it's very basically pointy, it's sharp, and it gets into their insides and it rips them all up so that they end up dying. But that's how BT corn works. And then the last one is you take that tomato, and maybe we have a tomato that one that I said that was disease resistant. We would just take out the part of it that makes it even that makes it get that disease. So a good example of that was like squash with mildew. That if it's something that gets mildew really, really bad, we actually go into the plant and we pull out the part of it that gives it the pores that can get infected with the mildew. So those are the 3 different types of GMOs. But the big thing for you guys to know, and this is why I'm telling you this, which that's hard to see unfortunately, is to let you know there are not that many GMOs. So don't necessarily pay more for a non-GMO seed if the GMO doesn't even exist. So the only GMOs we have are flax, tobacco, cotton, which we obviously aren't eating, but those are all ones that are used for making of clothes and cigarettes and etc. Rose, which is just for like roses in your backyard, just for beautification. alfalfa, which is for feed, rapeseed and canola, and corn, which is made for different oils. And then corn is for, it's not the sweet corn you're eating, it's the corn that's fed to cows and pigs. Soybean, which is used for like potato chips and even going in your toothbrush, or also feeding to livestock. Sugar beets, so now we're actually getting the stuff that we do eat just straight up. So sugar beets, rice, potatoes, beets, squash, tomatoes, which is only one tomato variety, plums, apples, it's only one apple variety, it's one that they grow, it's called the Arctic apple, and then papayas. So anything else, so that really the ones that we really grow around here is maybe your potatoes, your beets, your squash, a tomato, and that's really it. So that's only 4 things. Everything else, if it says it's non-GMO, pay extra. Don't pay extra because they don't exist. So just that was what I wanted to cover there really quick. And then I touched on this really quickly earlier, but I was going to come back, is with growing seeds, one of the things that's really neat that you can do is succession planting. So the really big deal here is, as you can see here, you got a whole bunch of different lettuces. And what you can do is if you planted this lettuce 3 weeks ago, you plant lettuce here 3 weeks later. And then the same thing over and over again. So as soon as this lettuce finally hits maturity, you can harvest that and you'll have brand new lettuce that's coming up right behind it. We'll get into some other types as we keep on going through. But it's one of the really big benefits of buying seed is that you've got other seeds sitting around. I can tell you I planted my arugula 3 times in the springtime and then 2 more times in the wintertime. And I was actually able to pick arugula in my backyard all the way through Christmas because the weather was so warm. But you can utilize seeds for succession planting really easy. Next is planting seedlings. The really big thing with planting seedlings is you're looking at usually higher cost because you are buying a pre-existing plant that someone else has already taken the time and energy and nutrient inputs to actually get to germinate, to start to grow up, to have that root mass really build up and start getting you that vegetative matter that's really going to help avoid the stressors of you getting in your yards. But because of that, it's pretty low input. If you're picking up a pretty decent-sized seedling from the grocery store, from Deep Roots, from your local nursery, it's usually you put it in the ground, and as long as you water it to first deal with that shock of it moving into a new environment, you're on the up and up from there, and it's not like you don't have to separate them out the same way you would with seeds. But generally they cost more than a packet of seeds for the same plant would be.